All right, so let's get right into it. If you're in the tech world, you've probably faced this choice, or you will soon. A company offers you a job, and they put a decision in front of you. Take the bigger guaranteed salary, or take a little less cash in exchange for a piece of the company, some equity. It's the classic battle, the sure thing versus the lottery ticket. Today, we're going to break down how you can actually make that choice.
On one side of the argument, you've got the pragmatists. The people who say, you can't pay your rent with promises. And they've got a point. A higher salary is cash in your pocket, right now. It's predictable, it's stable, and you can use it to build your life. Plus, in a startup world where cash is king, that guaranteed money is a pretty safe bet.
But then, you hear stories like this one, the kind that makes you wonder if playing it safe is the right move. This is the dream of equity, isn't it? The tiny flickering chance for a payout that could literally change your life. This isn't just about earning a living. It's about having skin in the game and, just maybe, hitting the jackpot if the company explodes.
So that brings us right to the million-dollar question. And sometimes it really is a million-dollar question. Is this equity you're being offered a real path to wealth, or is it, just as some people say, monopoly money? Well, the truth is, it's a gamble. But the key is to know the odds and understand the rules of the game before you place your bet.
Okay, before we can even begin to figure out what an offer is worth, you have to understand what you're actually getting. You're going to see a lot of acronyms thrown at you: ISO, NSO, RSU. It's like an alphabet soup. They might all sound kind of the same, but trust me, the differences in how they work, and especially how they get taxed, can be massive. We're talking about a difference that could cost you thousands or even hundreds of thousands of dollars if you're not paying attention. First up, we've got ISOs, which stands for Incentive Stock Options. You can think of these as the premium option, the golden child of equity. Why? Because they come with some really nice potential tax advantages. But, of course, there's a catch. The IRS has a whole bunch of strict rules you have to follow to get those benefits. And one key thing to remember is these are almost always for employees only.
Then you have NSOs, or non-qualified stock options. Think of these as the more flexible cousin of the ISO. They don't have those same sweet tax advantages, but what they lack in tax benefits, they make up for in flexibility. Companies can hand these out to not just employees, but also contractors, consultants, you name it.
And finally, let's talk about RSUs, restricted stock units. These are getting super popular, especially with bigger, more established startups. The huge difference here? You don't actually buy anything. An RSU is basically a promise from the company to give you shares of stock at a future date. You just have to stick around long enough for them to vest. It's way simpler, and you don't have to put any of your own cash on the line.
Now, this slide really gets to the core of the difference between the two main types of stock options. And it all comes down to taxes. It's a big deal. With an NSO, the second you decide to exercise your options, that is, to buy the stock, you have to pay regular income tax on your paper gain. That's the difference between the low price you pay and what the stock is currently worth. But with an ISO, you generally get to skip that immediate tax hit. That's a huge plus. But as we're about to see, it can create its own set of problems later on.
Of course, you don't just get handed a pile of stock on your first day. No, you have to earn it over time. It's a process called vesting. The most common setup is a 4-year schedule with a 1-year cliff. What does that mean? It means you have to work at the company for 1 full year before you get anything. If you leave on day 364, you walk away with 0. But the moment you hit your 1-year anniversary, boom, you've cleared the cliff, and 25% of your options are yours. After that, a little piece will typically vest every single month for the next 3 years, until you own it all.
So, you've decoded the alphabet soup, you get how vesting works, but what is all this stuff actually worth? A founder might throw out a huge number like, we're going to be a $100 million company. And on paper, your offer looks incredible. But to get to the real value, we need to do some pretty sobering math. There are 3 massive factors you absolutely have to consider.
The first one is dilution. Here's how it works. Every time a startup raises more money from investors, it creates and sells new shares of a company. When that happens, the total number of shares goes up. So even though you still have the same number of shares, your percentage of the total company actually gets smaller. You own a smaller slice of what is hopefully a much, much bigger pie.
The second factor is probability. And look, let's just be honest about this. Most startups fail. I mean, the vast majority of them just don't make it. So you have to weigh that incredible potential reward against the very, very real possibility that your equity could end up being worth absolutely nothing.
And the third killer factor is time. Startup equity is what they call an illiquid asset. That's just a fancy way of saying you can't just sell it whenever you want, like a stock on the New York Stock Exchange. On average, it can take 7, 8, even 10 years before a startup has a liquidity event, like an IPO or getting acquired, where you can finally turn those shares into actual cash. That is a long time to wait.
And this chart illustrates that harsh reality of probability perfectly. This is from research done at Harvard Business School, and it shows a dramatic funnel. If you start with 100 companies that get that initial seed funding, only about 40 of them will survive to raise their next big round, the Series A. And from that 40, only 25 make it to a Series B. That means about 70% of companies that get off the ground fail to even make it to the next major stage. The odds are tough.
So, after all that doom and gloom, you're probably asking, is there a simple way to get a realistic estimate? Well, those same Harvard researchers came up with a really useful little rule of thumb. They call it the 10% rule. As a quick back-of-the-napkin calculation, just take the initial paper value of the equity you were offered and multiply it by 10%. This simple math roughly accounts for all that dilution and the high probability of failure, giving you a much more sober, realistic ballpark number to think about.
Okay, so understanding the potential value is one half of the battle, but the other half is navigating all the risks. An equity package that looks amazing on paper can turn into a financial nightmare if you're not careful. It's like walking through a minefield, and you need to know where the traps are.
So besides the dilution and the long wait we just talked about, there's also something called concentration risk. That's having all your eggs in one basket, with your financial future tied to the fate of a single risky company. But maybe the most dangerous trap, the one that catches so many people completely off guard, is a surprise tax bill.
This is the big one, you guys, especially if you have those premium ISOs. It's called the Alternative Minimum Tax, or AMT. Now, with your regular taxes, it's simple. You pay tax on your salary. Done. But when you exercise ISOs, the IRS forces you to do a whole separate parallel tax calculation. And in this special calculation, they add the paper gain from your options, the money you haven't even received in cash, to your income. This can trigger an absolutely massive tax bill, sometimes tens of thousands of dollars, that you have to pay out of pocket. It's a brutal surprise.
Okay, we've covered a ton of ground. The different types of equity, how to value it, the scary pitfalls. Now let's get practical. How do you take all this information and actually use it to look at an offer and make a smart decision? It's time to build your personal playbook. You need to start thinking like an investor, not just an employee. And that means you have to ask some tough questions. Don't be shy. Ask, what's the total number of shares outstanding? That's the only way you can figure out what percentage of the company you actually own. Ask, what was the valuation at the last funding round, to get a baseline. You should also ask about the company's financial health, its runway, its burn rate, and maybe most importantly, what's the founder's track record? A great idea is one thing, but execution is everything. Because at the end of the day, after you've run all the numbers and done all the analysis, choosing equity over cash isn't just a financial decision. It's a bet. You're not just betting on a product or a market opportunity. You're betting on the people. You're betting on the founders, on the team, and on their vision for the future. So the real question isn't just, what is this worth on paper? The real question is, who are you willing to bet on?